During World War II, the RAF's biggest challenge was actually food, not because the Air Force intentionally cut pilot rations. Instead, RAF Command always strived to guarantee every pilot a daily intake of 3,900 calories. But by 1940, German U-boats severed Britain's Atlantic supply lines, sending 728,000 tons of UK-bound grain and meat to the ocean floor. Though the British government enforced strict food rationing, diverting civilian food to prioritize frontline supplies, the variety of food available to pilots still dropped drastically. During the Battle of Britain, RAF pilots each received 100 grams of bacon, 2 eggs, a bowl of powdered milk cornflakes, and a cup of camp liquid coffee. After this meager breakfast, pilots took off to fight Germans for air superiority. If they survived to return, lunch was just potatoes, cabbage, and canned beef stew. Dinner swapped potatoes for baked beans, beef for sausages. How monotonous was the RAF diet? On Christmas Day 1940, pilots only got tomato soup, roast turkey, pork, and applesauce. Vegetables were just cabbage, peas, and potatoes. Once common delicacies like salmon, pudding, and wine vanished entirely. However, compared to civilians, pilot rations were still quite lavish. So many locals near airbases hoped to work in military kitchens just to score extra food. Unfortunately, in late 1940, a sudden foul plague swept Britain. Eggs instantly became scarce. Britain's food rationing system neared collapse. To combat this crisis, the Ministry of Food launched Dig for Victory, urging citizens to plant gardens and grow carrots, a vegetable previously used mainly as animal feed. Meanwhile, the RAF, to hide the fact that night fighters carried airborne radar, had some night ace pilots joke to the press that their night vision came from eating lots of carrots. Spurred by this propaganda, UK carrot production saw a 100,000-ton surplus in 1941. The whole nation embraced creative carrot cooking. As national idols, the RAF again took on propaganda duties. A biscuit mixing margarine, sugar, carrots, and flour became the pilot's daily snack. It quickly became a civilian fad. Until the U.S. Lend-Lease Act took effect, Britain's food shortage saw little real relief. Massive amounts of powdered eggs, spam, baked beans, canned fish, and frozen meat reached the British Isles. For the RAF, starving was no longer an issue, but meals remained terribly dull. In 1943, British pilots flying night bombing missions over Europe faced day after day of pre-flight meals consisting of baked potatoes, fried sausages, bacon, and scrambled eggs. Many forced themselves to eat out of duty, while painfully realizing this might be their last meal. Fortunately, the RAF's emergency flight rations were relatively advanced. This Mark II escape ration contained 5 sealed packs of malted milk tablets, 2 small packs of gum, 4 barley sugars, and a small tube of energy tablets. These sweets were stored in a metal tin for pilots to carry. After bailing out, these rations provided pilots with minimum energy for about 3 days, helping countless pilots return to friendly lines and fight again. The Luftwaffe's early World War II rations were simply luxurious. Pilot daily calorie intake hit a massive 4,500 calories, a standard far exceeding other units. For breakfast, they enjoyed dark bread, eggs, jam, and real butter, plus a cup of chicory or acorn substitute coffee. Lunch was equally well prepared. Pilots enjoyed fruit, broth, eggs, white toast, and sausages. Dinner was even richer, usually featuring a proper hot dish. Starters were fried meatballs. The main course was vegetable meat stew with white toast. If pilots were lucky after dinner, they got wine or beer. But German kitchens had a strict rule: empty bottles must be returned. Beyond daily meals, smoking German pilots also received a daily ration of 7 cigarettes, 1 more than regular infantrymen. At frontline airbases, Luftwaffe pilots also got iron ration cans, including 300 grams of bread, 400 grams of canned meat, 150 grams of cheese, 150 grams of dehydrated vegetables, and a bag of real instant coffee. Though termed iron rations, pilots' rationing standards were clearly much higher than regular infantry. Furthermore, German pilots strongly pursued stimulants. Besides access to real caffeine, each plane stocked a box of high-caffeine Scho-Ka-Kola chocolate. This chocolate packed extremely high caffeine. One piece matched a strong coffee, but relying on caffeine alone couldn't sustain intense frontline combat. So many German pilots began using methamphetamine, nicknamed pilot salt. Data shows just from April to June 1940, the Wehrmacht bought 35 million meth pills, Taking this drug, German pilots fought on just 2 hours of sleep. This extreme stimulant briefly boosted combat efficiency, but severely damaged their bodies. Early in the war, German pilots utilized this intense combat style to achieve many victories. However, this deadly overexertion brought severe consequences. Frequent sorties caused unreplenished personnel losses. Pilot health also collapsed under prolonged stress and drugs. After 1943, Luftwaffe superiority faded away, ultimately losing battlefield initiative. U.S. Army and Navy aviation mostly relied on fixed bases or aircraft carriers. Thus, their daily diet heavily relied on A rations or B rations. These supplies easily met soldiers' quantity needs. However, for bomber pilots flying long-range missions deep into Europe, things were vastly different. Besides 6 to 8 hour flights, they faced German fighter intercepts. Such grueling missions massively drained pilots' stamina. Relying solely on base meals was clearly insufficient. To solve this, the U.S. Quartermaster Corps introduced the Combat Flight Lunch in 1943. A 3-person canned ration to refuel bomber crews mid-flight, but this combat flight lunch was highly impractical from the start. One ration box held 113 grams canned beef, 14 grams butter, 30 grams coffee, 113 grams milk powder, 170 grams canned tomatoes, 396 grams biscuits, 6 bouillon cubes, plus chili powder, hard candy, gum, and lemon powder. The Quartermaster Corps imagined crews could heat this food on heavy bombers' electric stoves. Enjoying a hot meal at 30,000 feet, but expecting crews to prep food mid-flight was completely unrealistic. Shaken by flak blasts, cans would fly wildly around the cabin. Unheated cans became inedible in the freezing altitude. Ultimately, only the gum, chocolate, and candy were barely acceptable to the pilots. Most pilots preferred a thermos of coffee, a sandwich, and a candy bar over this combat flight lunch. As long-range escort fighters joined, the combat flight lunch became even more useless. So the USAAF in September 1944 issued a new ration, Aircrew Lunch. Compared to its predecessor, Aircrew Lunch was basically a candy box. It packed chocolate drops, hard fruit candies, fudge, AD ration chocolate bar, and gum. These high-calorie sweets were exclusively issued to crews flying over 3 hours. Serving as mid-flight snacks, the Aircrew Lunch design was very user-friendly. The box could be slid open one-handed, so fighter pilots could easily eat without letting go of the stick. Besides Aircrew Lunch, U.S. aircrews also carried AAF survival rations on certain aircraft. This ration mainly contained fruit drops, vitamins, and gum. One can sustain 5 to 6 people for a day, or one person for 5 days. 4 cellophane packs of hard candy and vitamins provided minimum required energy, while gum acted as a stimulant, though production of this ration was limited, with only 40,000 sets made during World War II. 3 such cans were packed inside the pilot's M592 parachute survival kit. Though extremely uncomfortable to wear, it was truly groundbreaking, helping many pilots survive emergencies during the war. Frankly, those enjoying the best in-flight meals were actually Japanese pilots. After all, their meals were mostly freshly made. Whether Japanese Army or Navy Air Service, their meal setups were quite similar, divided into basic and extra meals. Basic meals mirrored USAAF rations, cooked at base or on carriers by head chefs. Take the carrier Zuikaku's aircrews as an example, before Pearl Harbor. Their diet was remarkably lavish. Breakfast included bento rice, bacon, fried beef, and seaweed. Lunch was sushi and oden. Dinner featured bento rice, stew, and pickled plums. Plus, late-night bread snacks were served. Their daily calorie intake hovered around 4,000 calories. For missions exceeding 3 hours, the kitchen provided pilots with extra supplementary meals. For instance, on large planes, crews usually received aluminum lunchboxes filled with bite-sized sushi bento for easy mid-flight eating. For cramped cockpits like the Zero fighter, chefs made sushi into hand rolls wrapped tightly in wax paper. Fighters lacked pressurized cabins then. Wax paper retained moisture, keeping the sushi tasting fresh. Pilots also enjoyed soda, tea, milk, and coffee to ease long flight fatigue, but without pressurized cabins. Opening Ramune soda at 15,000 feet often caused violent geysers. Ace pilot Saburo Sakai experienced this exactly during a Solomon Islands dogfight. He struggled to manually wipe the sticky syrup off his canopy. For large aircraft like the Betty or Emily bombers, dietary rules were even stricter. The 701st Naval Air Group required their bentos to include lotus root. tofu skin, carrots, and red ginger to prevent beriberi. Meanwhile, the 801st Group's Emily bomber crews demanded less rice and more tamagoyaki. Inarazushi, fish sushi, and tempting tempura. Furthermore, Emily bombers featured food warmers. Barring any US fighter intercepts, Japanese flight missions were delightful culinary journeys. The Japanese Army Air Service, however, focused more on chemical combat enhancements. The Army developed vitamin pills, caffeinated liquor, and snacks. They even distributed awakening drug, liquid meth. As the war worsened, these chemicals flooded into pilot rations, intended to numb their nerves, making them fight bravely in kamikaze suicide attacks, dying generously for militarism. Across the Soviet Red Army, pilots enjoyed the most generous pre-war food rations. Daily meals were incredibly diverse: 400 grams rye bread, 400 grams white bread, 90 grams cereal, 400 grams flour, 350 grams meat, 90 grams fish, 90 grams butter, 80 grams sugar, 200 grams milk, 20 grams condensed milk, 10 grams sour cream, 20 grams cheese, 1 egg, 500 grams potatoes, and 385 grams vegetables, totaling a massive 4,712 calories. This even beat their German counterparts. Pure elite treatment. However, when the war broke out, the German blitzkrieg was unstoppable. The Soviet Air Force suffered heavy losses. By July 1943, despite having 8491 aircraft on the front lines, there were only 5,732 pilots available. Daily training barely met standards. Naturally, pilot rations also shrank drastically. Now, Soviet pilots had only a cup of coffee or tea with 400 grams of dark bread. Occasionally some sausage slices. If pilots survived morning dogfights, they returned for a relatively decent lunch, often featuring American spam, cabbage stew, and beet porridge. Dinner portions dropped below pre-war levels. White bread vanished, but calories stayed around 3,500, still higher than ground crews. So pilots often shared their limited food with mechanics, partly out of camaraderie, partly to ensure mechanics had energy to maintain the planes, keeping the aircraft combat ready. To boost pilot survival rates, the Soviets issued flight survival rations. One ration pack held 3 stews, 3 condensed milk cans, 800 grams of biscuits, and 100 grams of chocolate. However, these rations were bolted under the seats, meaning pilots only accessed them after a successful crash landing. Bailing out meant getting nothing, so Soviet pilots formed a habit of stuffing candy, chocolate bars, or biscuits into their pockets before missions. The Lend-Lease Act ensured every P-39 fighter also carried M592 survival kits. The kit's rations, first aid, flares, sleeping bag, flashlight, and fishing rod thoroughly impressed the Soviets. However, they universally complained the parachute pack was too bulky. Thus, they kept their habit of stuffing it under the seat, only using it after a successful crash landing. For wartime pilots, a good meal was more than fuel. It offered brief warmth amidst brutal combat. In the endless daily dogfights, they either awaited victory or the moment they were shot down.